All right, we are talking about one of the great masterpieces of world spirituality. That's what it has become. A Course in Miracles. It's only about 50 years old, and no one saw it coming. Not the original co-scribes, Helen and Bill Thetford and Helen Schuckman. They didn't. They thought it was for them originally. They thought it was a teaching just for them to help them to find a way to get along with each other and with everyone else. And then they realized it really was for everyone. And then they were surprised when the course was published in 1976 that people were flocking. Maybe that's not the right word, but they were very eager to learn A Course in Miracles. And now it really has become a worldwide phenomenon. Just in the last 50 years, it's talking about millions of people now. This is an interview. I'm going to just read a little bit from this interview with Bill Thetford. It's on the acim.org website. And this was conducted in 1984. This was after Helen had passed, well after the course was published. And for anyone who thinks that Helen was kind of just played a minor role in all this, that's not really true. And if you think that Bill was not a genius in his own right, you're mistaken as well. You just got to read this interview. So the reason I'm reading this interview, though, is because I'm doing a little thing right now on, I think, one of the most important topics of A Course in Miracles, because it really gets to a few different issues. We're talking about non-duality and A Course in Miracles. It gets into a bunch of issues. One is, did the original teachers of A Course in Miracles know what they were doing? I mean, bottom line is, did Jesus, who was Jesus? Who was the Jesus that Helen understood to be coming through her or giving her this message? Did that Jesus, if he was coming from the highest source, you would think that he knew what he was doing. If you don't think he knew what he was doing, then that calls into question this whole undertaking. And I think you have to consider that this is a false teaching, right? That if there's anything here that is off, it calls the whole thing into question. And I think that's what we have to keep in mind. And I'm not beyond throwing the whole thing out myself. I think that's what intellectual honesty and integrity means, is that you are willing to let go of your beliefs, your assumptions, your worldview, even your values, in light of the truth being revealed. Problem is, in this world, good luck finding the truth. Good luck being able to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that one thing is true versus another thing, right? And part of the factionalism we find in the world of A Course in Miracles is due to that very fact. No pun intended there. There are no facts in this world, at least in the sense that we can prove anything 100%, that will satisfy everyone. No one will ever be completely satisfied at any given moment in time. That does not mean that truth is relative. It just means that in the world of perception, if you agree with what Jesus is saying, is that we live in a world of perception. In the world of perception, that seems to be the case. And that is why we don't stay in a place of firm certitude, but we keep going back and forth. We could keep going into doubt and questioning. But anyway, let's read something that Bill says in this interview. I would read the entire interview on your own. We do not have time. We're just going to read. First of all, I think it's interesting in this interview, Bill was really looking into the mystical traditions. At once they had scribed the course was out, Bill started to really look into the mystical traditions of the world. He was actually reading Ken Wilber. This is when Ken Wilber was just getting started. He talks about Ken Wilber in this interview. He was reading the book Quantum Questions. And then Bill starts to talk about this idea of the course being a Christian Vedanta. So that's what I want to get to. He says, I think the course is clearly in accord with the perennial philosophy underlying all the great religions. However, there are some fundamental differences, such as the course's emphasis on giving up our belief in the reality of sin and guilt. Religion, as I experienced it when I was younger, seemed to stress these negative aspects. So that is true. Even in the mystical traditions, we don't seem to see this emphasis on guilt and the idea of sin and guilt, or the ideas of sin and guilt. The course is unique, seemingly, in that regard. Let's read another. The course does use Christian terminology, but at the same time it conveys universal spiritual truths, which is perhaps why people of all faiths can find it of value. I think the course states it very well when it says a universal theology is impossible, but a universal experience is not only possible, but necessary. Now, I think it's important that this idea of the universal experience, seems to be saying what we find in Hinduism, the idea of paths are many, truth is one. Paths are many, truth is one, which means that when we arrive at the truth, whether you're a Hindu, a Buddhist, a Jew, a Christian, Muslim, any of any faith or no faith, could be an atheist, when you arrive at the truth, you will see the same truth that everyone else is seeing. Maybe there's only one at that point, right? Let's just see. Okay, I missed the part. Give me a second here. I'm sorry about this. He talks about going to the Vedanta, going and reading Ramakrishna and Vivekananda, and how, let's see, I'm sorry. Shortly after we began transcribing the material, I started reading rather widely in the mystical literature of the world. One of the early writers who made a deep impression on me was Vivekananda. Vivekananda was originally a lawyer in India, and he became the student of Ramakrishna. Ramakrishna is considered to be one of the greatest mystics and sages of India of all time. This is in the 19th century. Vivekananda was a skeptical lawyer who came to Ramakrishna, and Ramakrishna put him into samadhi, basically, which is a state of mystical union. And Vivekananda became his follower. His name was not Vivekananda. Ramakrishna gave him that name. Viveka means discrimination, and Ananda is bliss. So he was the Swami. He became Swami Vivekananda, the Swami who embodies the bliss of discernment or discrimination. And Vivekananda actually, if you wonder why, how has yoga taken such great root in the West and become such a huge worldwide phenomenon, Vivekananda had a very big role to play. I'm not going to go deep into it right at this moment, but he had a very big role to play in the dissemination of yoga in the West. So obviously, Bill here encountered Vivekananda. He was reading Vivekananda. So what does he say? He says, one of the early writers who made a deep impression on me was Vivekananda. In his exposition of the Vedanta philosophy of India, he was a disciple of Ramakrishna, who in the late 1800s and in the early part of this century founded a number of Ramakrishna ashrams and teaching centers in this country. The Vedanta Advaita philosophy, he really meant the Advaita. No, I guess he said it right, but it's really generally said Advaita Vedanta. The Vedanta Advaita philosophy, as expounded by Vivekananda, seemed to have some striking similarities to the teachings of the Course, even though the context and the language are different. At the time, I remember thinking the Course could be described as a form of Christian Vedanta. Students of Buddhism tell me that the similarities between the Course and Buddhist teachings are very striking. Interestingly, too, is the fact that many people associated with the Course have come from Jewish backgrounds, like myself, and have found it extraordinarily meaningful and helpful despite the Christian terminology. So I've been impressed by how ecumenical the Course is, and that its purpose is not to increase our sense of separation, but to bring people together. Okay, so paths are many, truth is one. Universal theology is not possible, but a universal experience is where we're all going. It doesn't matter what path we take. Truth is truth. The Course, don't let the Course's Christian terminology get in the way of the deeper message. And that's why a lot of people do get turned off, because they look at the Course, they start to read it, and they don't really understand. That's where it's helpful to have a guide with the Course in Miracles, because they don't understand that, is the Course Christian or is it something else? Because many Christians would not accept Vedanta, right? They would not accept this Hindu-sounding stuff, like talking about the self. The concept of the self seems to be a Hindu thing. So, and the Course uses the word self all the time, with a capital S and a little s. So, and the self, by the way, is a translation of the term Atman, which can also be translated as soul, but often is translated as self. And the Atman is the individual self, the self that thinks that it is separate from the whole. And when it realizes that it is not separate, then it becomes one with Brahman, or Brahman, which is the undifferentiated, formless, nameless reality beyond all names and forms. And that seems to be what the Course is pointing at, is that this idea of self-realization. I think that's what Bill was alluding to here. Is definitely seems to be the Course seems to be getting at the same idea of self-realization, realizing the one self that is all. Let's just finish. We're going to conclude here with a passage that Bill quotes. This is the one passage from the Course that he quotes in this interview. And what does he say? He says, "It is wonderful to know that so many people on a worldwide basis are using the Course to facilitate their own spiritual awakening. I think the Course states what is happening with poetic clarity in the following passage." And here's the passage. "A sleeping mind must waken. As it sees its own perfection mirroring the Lord of life, so perfectly it fades into what is reflected there. And now it is no more a mere reflection. It becomes the thing reflected, and the light which makes reflection possible. No vision now is needed, for the wakened mind is one that knows its source, itself, its holiness. It fades. That's the sleeping mind that awakens, sees its own perfection, mirroring the Lord of life. Who is the Lord of life? That would be God. That's another name for God. So it sees its own perfection, mirroring the Lord of life so perfectly that it fades into what is reflected there, which seems to suggest that it becomes one with God, right? And this term fades, by the way, Jesus sometimes uses the word fades and sometimes uses the word disappears. That the Son disappears into the Father disappears into the Son when you get to the ultimate reality. Or I'm trying to remember where it says fades. I think in Workbook Lesson 326 is where it says the Son fades into the will of the Father. Something like that. And now it is no more a mere reflection. It becomes the thing reflected and the light which makes reflection possible. No vision is now needed. Now, what did Bill think about this? I don't know. We'd have to find out. But he did say that he was thinking that the course could be called a Christian Vedanta, and I think that's a great way to put it. Except, I don't think the course is Christian per se, and I don't think it's Vedanta per se. It's its own thing. But that doesn't mean that the truth, the point I really want to make is that doesn't mean that the truth that it's pointing to is not the same truth that all of these other beautiful ancient traditions are also pointing to. Right? So don't there's form and content. The form is different, but the content remains the same, or the goal is the same. Doesn't matter how you get there. Just got to get there, right? Whatever works for you. And that's why I would never, when this non-duality issue, obviously there's room to not see the course as a non-dual, having a non-dual metaphysics. You don't have to see it that way. I think it might be helpful to understand the course better and to not discount those passages which seem to speak, like the one we just read, that seem to speak of a non-dual aspect of reality, which is that when you get to the highest ultimate reality, there's only one, or there's only that loving presence, let's put it that way, that unconditionally loving presence. That doesn't mean, I think why that scares people is like, who would want that for eternity? But obviously, we don't have to have that for eternity. We can have whatever we want. That's fine. Obviously we're here right now because we didn't want that. So it doesn't need to scare you, because you can, I think what it is that when you really understand that non-dual aspect, then everything else becomes clearer. And yeah, you can live in a body, you can be a separate self in the universe, you can be in loving relationship to a God with form, for example. It will make it all that much sweeter, I would say. But I do think you can't discount the non-dual aspect of this, and the fact that many people have said that the non-dual experience for them is the highest. Other people say it's not the highest, but let's let's not judge one another in this regard, but let's listen to one another, be open to what the other has to say. And I would say not read the Course in a way that discludes information that we don't like. And I think there may be room for a both and rather than an either or. And that you could say also that there are different levels of reality, but at the ultimate level, it would be non-dual. And I understand that some people say, well, why is that the ultimate level? Maybe the non-duality is a lower rung